Hey, good people. Happy Sunday and welcome to a brand new episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Sarfo-Mensah. If this is your first time tuning into the podcast, we welcome you and we hope that you return for future episodes and dope content. If you are a returning viewer or listener of the podcast, we welcome you back. And we hope that tonight's episode is one that is informative, insightful, and enlightening to you. So before we get to the main event, let's go ahead and make a few quick announcements. First and foremost, we have our Stay True to Teaching You virtual summit coming up in a few weeks on April 16th through 19th. And as you can see, we have 20 plus innovative and revolutionary educators who are going to be representing during those 4 days, pouring into us on content focused around teacher wellness and self-care, culturally responsive anti-racist practices, and finally, social-emotional learning, all essential needs that have to be addressed during this pandemic. So if you want to get more information regarding this summit, or if your school district or yourself or colleagues are interested in registering, you can head over to identitytalk4educators.com/conference to get more information about the summit. And then finally, we can't have a summit without having some official gear, right? So we have our Identity Talk Apparel shop, which is offering all kinds of designs and accessories for teachers everywhere. We have some official Stay True to Teaching You virtual summit apparel specifically for this conference. So if you're interested in tapping in, make sure you visit the Teespring store at teesprings.com/stores/the Identity Talk Apparel shop. And just to make it worth your while, for anybody who registers for the summit, you automatically get a 50% discount on all Identity Talk apparel. So you'll make sure you tap in, take advantage of this opportunity and these offers. It's going to be an experience unlike no other. So now that that's been mentioned, let's get to the main event. And tonight's guest is somebody who I actually had the honor of meeting a couple of summers ago at the State of Black Learning Conference in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I was doing some presentations. And I've come to realize from that point on that she is somebody who is all about education. She is a true revolutionary in every sense of the word. She's a proud Pittsburgh native, wears it on her sleeve everywhere she goes. And now she's currently the executive director for the Center of Equity in Urban Education at Elms College. And we're going to talk a lot about her new role, in addition to her journey education, a lot of the work that she's doing in the advocacy space. So without further ado, I want to bring on our guest, Miss Tyra, or should I say Dr., got to put some respect on that name, Dr. Tyra Good, to the podcast. Welcome.
Thanks, Kwame. Thanks for having me here. I am excited to get into this talk to, as you said, to talk about the journey of education and the work that I have been doing over the past 20-something years and my passion behind it. So thank you, and thank you for welcoming me to your podcast.
Well, thank you for taking the invitation. This is going to be an awesome conversation. And just to kick things off, I usually ask my guest to talk about their journey that led them to education, but I want to just say one word: Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. When you think about Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, talk to me about what that means to you and how that shapes who you are, not just as an educator, but just as a human being in general.
Yeah. So actually, when I think about Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, I automatically will think about Pittsburgh Public Schools, since I'm a product of the Pittsburgh Public School system. And I also think about my particular community within Pittsburgh that I was raised in, which is the Manchester community. Um, as I think about Manchester, I think about the different challenges or some of the things that you may hear growing up in the hood, going to urban school districts. The students can be from XYZ community, all of these different rough things. And so that was the seed of my upbringing in the community that I grew up in Manchester, which really feeds a lot of the work that I do of coming from Manchester, coming from Pittsburgh, and the work that I do nationally and also globally.
Awesome, awesome. And just to follow up with what Pittsburgh means to you, you are Dr. Tyra Good. So you are a Black woman in academia, which is huge, especially in this contemporary time. So I'm interested in knowing, how are you able to maintain your identity as Dr. Good from the hood? And we're going to talk about that hood acronym later on in our conversation. But also, like, your ability to leverage your duality, not just as a Black woman in academia, but also as just being Tyra from Pittsburgh. Like, how are you able to leverage those two identities in the work that you do?
Yeah, I would say for me, it was something that I had to learn, right? Of truly being authentically myself and what that mean in different spaces. So what that meant for me as a Black woman to come from a certain community, to come from, the East Coast and to enter into this workforce. And so for me, it was a struggle, and it took me a while to find that identity of saying that it's okay to embrace holistically who I am, the good, the bad, and the ugly, to embrace the journey that I am on now, and to also stand up for myself and stand up also for my son, but also my family members or young people that I mentor, to not take on the onus of labels of what society or different people may put on you, to say that despite of all of these different things, you can still be this, right? And I had to learn to accept that once I came into the fullness of who I am, it wasn't despite of all of these different challenges, it was because of. And so I think for me, once I began to embrace that shift of not despite of, but because of, like all of our experiences, all of our pains, all of our hurts, all of our challenges, all of our victories and triumphs, that is what makes me who I am. Hence the acronym Dr. Good from the hood.
Awesome. And while we're talking about Dr. Good from the hood, can you break down what the acronym HOOD means so that our audience has an idea of what that is?
Yes. And so HOOD, H-O-O-D, for me, I broke it down to stands for H is healing. And we look at the two O's, our offspring daily. And so I know that in going out to society, going out into this world, it is healing that we need from different things that we have experienced and been a part of over our lives. And then our collectively of saying that we cannot do this and should not do this by ourselves, but a collective body. So our, to me, represents a community, right? Standing on the shoulders of giants, standing and calling on your ancestors. So collectively, our mean community and our offspring. And so that we all know that, it goes back to family. So offspring. So I may not be personally related to you, but I am related to you, right? So the generations of just going back and knowing that we have this ownership of our offspring and who do we consider our offspring, and daily, right? This work needs to be done daily, because daily we go out, daily we hurt, daily we're victimized, daily we experience it all of these challenges. And so it is the renewing of this, centering yourself every single day, that we need to remind ourselves that, this healing is a process that is not just one and done, but a continuation. So healing our offspring daily. And for me, it was also important to look at not just the definitions or the negative stereotypes that are put out there in regards to the hood. Like, what does that mean? It means crack and crime and violence and whatever is negative, or whatever is uneducated, whatever, to me, it seemed like, oh, if you're Black, you're from the hood. So I had to just kind of really dissect that and really take that layer off. But I know that if we don't do that work psychologically, it can go into our unconscious mind. And so we begin to operate and move and do things, and we don't even know that we're taking on what somebody else had put on us instead of defining who we are ourselves. And so hood, healing our offspring daily, was a way for me to actually stand up and to give back and to say that, yes, I am Dr. Good from the hood. Yes, there are these different experiences, but also from that is greatness, right? There is hope, there is resilience, there is, when we think about now in schools, project-based learning, and there's a term to it, or there's grit and all these things. Like, we don't need those terms. Right. And so it's like, that's who we are. Like, we had to, make two ends come together to complete a whole. So it is sometimes looking at, for me, the hood, the beauty of the struggle, right, of getting into the manifestation of who we are now. And as I do mentorship, as I talk to other young people, as I talk to family members who are growing up, it is, not to let someone else define you, but you say who you are. And you flip the script and say, like, yes, I am from this particular environment, but own that, right? And so I think that through all of my work, I really portray that, exhibit that, and not think about the deficit. Yeah, it's there, but it's also there in other communities too. And so we don't talk about that. And there's also brilliance. So I choose to talk about the brilliance, the joy, the genius that is within all of us, and to cultivate that, especially as I'm working with pre-service educators and current educators.
And as you were talking about the beauty of the struggle and the HOOD acronym, you can't mention the HOOD acronym without reiterating the importance of community, because when we talk about HOOD, we're talking about community. And I just think about just back in the day when I was a youngin' and I was growing up, if you got in trouble in school, it wasn't just your mama you had to deal with, or your dad. You had to deal with your neighbor next door, your neighbor across the street, your neighbor on the other side of your house, okay? Your other neighbor from 2-3 doors down. They all played a role in your development, and they held you accountable for making sure you did the right thing, not just in school, but just in life. Making sure that you respect your elders, make sure that you respect authority figures and other things. So I think when we talk about HOOD, we have to talk about the importance of community, especially in this day and age where parents need to be reaffirmed and informed that they are the most important stakeholders of the educational process. And I think that's something that's been lost in recent years, and we're trying so desperately to get back into the consciousness and psyche of so many parents and community members who want to do more to help our young people, but feel powerless with everything that's going on around them.
Right. And knowing, like, as we define teachers, as we define educators, I think if anything over this past year of the pandemic, it is really flipping the script into really seeing like the need for parents, right? So before, I feel like sometimes there's the disrespect from the education system that it's like, oh, those parents, they don't care. They don't love their kids. They don't, whatever is negative. But in order to make the world work over this last year of thinking about community partnerships, collaborations, it was a new respect, I think, of parents. And I think a new respect, too, of teachers and the work that they do in the classroom. Absolutely. And if I look at, my family, my brother has 2 kids. My mother is retired now, so he had a job where he still had to go into work. And so since their school is actually closed down and they're doing, virtual learning, my 5-year-old niece and my 11-year-old nephew was dropped off every day at my mother's house. And she was the one helping them log on. She was the one checking their homework, making sure like they had their time breaks and then logging back on. And so you just think about, the one, my 11-year-old nephew, a little bit more, sufficient in helping himself because he's in the 6th grade, but to have my 5-year-old niece who's in preschool. And so the importance of really going back to the community, the value. If we think about parents, we think about guardians and the new, I think, revived respect that it takes the village collectively. And so, right, this past year have really just kind of shown that. And the community is everything, right? And so for me, as I do my research, as I do any of my teaching, it's focused around culturally responsive school, family, community partnerships that no entity should work alone.
Awesome. And we're going to get deeper into that a little later on. But I wanted to stay with the early life of Tyra Good because there's so much that we need to unpack here. And part of unpacking is your time that you spent at Howard University. So you left Pittsburgh, went all the way to the nation's capital to attend the Mecca that is Howard University. So I want to know from you, as somebody who never had the privilege of attending an HBCU, and I'm very proud of my Temple University degree. Love Temple University, love Philly to the fullest. But in the back of my mind, if there was one school that I could attend, that's an HBCU, I always tell folks that I felt like I would have been a Howard Bison. I felt like I would have been a Bison for sure. And then Hampton, folks, I have a lot of Hampton friends too. So I know there's who's the real HU, right? So I don't want to get into that.
Like there's no battle, there's no competition. Like we know the real HU is.
All right, I'm gonna leave it at that.
Yeah, just
we'll let y'all beef with regard to that. All right, but real quickly, in what ways did your experience at Howard University impact your life, but also shape your development as an educator? Because so many folks talk about how that experience was life-changing for them. So I want to know from you what your story was with regard to that.
Yeah, so I would say for Howard, it is really talking about the journey that led me to there as well, that really had a profound impact on my then experience once I was a student at Howard. And so in growing up in Pittsburgh, I actually grew up at the height of the gang violence in Pittsburgh started in 1993. And I was actually in the 10th grade there. And my first cousin, who was actually my best friend as well, was murdered. And so when he was murdered and when I was in the 10th grade, I was 16, he was 18 years old. And not only was he murdered, at the same time, he was with his best friend and he was also murdered. And a third friend was injured from that and suffered and passed away years later. Right.
Oh, wow.
And so Pittsburgh and my community that I grew up in really became this place that I wanted to get away from. Like I just wanted to get away from it because to me during that time, it was situated within hurt and pain and all of these various things. And I was a student at Pittsburgh Public Schools, and all through school, like I really gravitated towards learning. I love learning. I love books. I actually love going to school. Right. And so I would say that at that time, I was considered what I thought to be, I was smart. I was getting straight A's. I was president of the National Honor Society and really heavily involved in school. And when my cousin had passed away that very next year, or from that point on, it was like May of my sophomore year, But it was like a change or a turn talk within inside of me, where even going into the next year, like I didn't go into, there wasn't like the talk about going into therapy and seeing a counselor or anything like that. And I remember just going to school, and it just seemed like the world was just a different place, right?
Right.
And I was wondering, just in regards to just like the teachers, like I started wearing all black. There was like a whole change in me, but I kept like doing my schoolwork. I was, had good behavior, and all of that to say that there was the trauma and the pain that was really kind of never unpacked, right? It was just layered on of just more academics. And despite graduating towards the top of my class, number 4 in my class, getting straight A's, high honor rolls, scholars classes, all of these different things, I failed to get over an 800 on the SAT. I mean, you get like 200 points just for writing your name. The total score is 1,600. So it's like, what? So I took it 3 times. I even took like a semester, which was an elective, of which is like SAT prep. And so I just couldn't get it. Like it wasn't clicking. And so I did get accepted to a lot of different colleges that I applied for. And I ended up going to Howard. So when I went to Howard, my first semester, I had to take one of the conditions was taking a remedial reading and writing course. And I remember just feeling how low I felt. And the anger towards education or the education system or Pittsburgh public schools, that they had failed me. Like, how did you let me get this, far with scholars classes, and then I can't even pass the SAT? And so my major was in business management, and I wasn't even thinking about education at the time. I just figured if I majored in business management and had a concentration in hospitality management, I would work in airlines and cruise lines and casinos and hotels and Disney World and all of those different things that you can do in hospitality. So I figured I would travel the world and make money and never go back to Pittsburgh, because to me, it was that center of heartache and it was that center of pain. And I would say that freshman year, taking that course, that experience of just having a professor that saw us as students and always made sure that, this is just a stepping stone on your journey. You are capable. You're supposed to be here. You can do this. And also knowing that growing up, I was always told and believed, even from like the shows like the Cosby Show, Different World, that, even as Black people, you can be anything and do anything and just put your heart and mind to it. So I thought that I wholeheartedly believed that and thought that. And going to Howard, it was a culture shock to me. It was an eye opener for me, even being African American, going to a HBCU, because I was going to school with so many affluent Black people that when they talked about summer internships or different things that they did growing up, they were talking about going back and working for, their mothers or their fathers or their grandparents' company. And for me, I realized at that moment, I thought I believed that, this was possible. But when I was actually around people and meeting friends, that this was, a history or a legacy within their family, that it was like, what was my unbelief? Like, why was I so shocked about that? So it was at Howard, I think the experience really shaped me to know that there's more than just the one experience of Black people, that we're all not from the hood. We all don't face all of these different negative things of the stereotypes of, the public school systems. And so it was just layers of really unpacking different things to relearning a lot of different things just about myself, my culture, my heritage. And so I believe I was thrust into that at Howard, and just different curriculums and different readings that I was never exposed to in the public school system. So Howard really just kind of birthed that, not only just knowing, but that full deep down believing. And so of knowing that, there's different scholars, there's different activists, there's all of these different people who were just Black and prominent leaders coming to campus, it instilled in me a true sense of, I can, I will, I must, I shall, and standing on the shoulders of giants and ancestors.
And that's the part that people mention time and time again about their experience at the HBCU. That self-efficacy piece, the
Yes.
confidence, the pride in their culture, the brilliance, the greatness, all these things that we don't experience in our traditional K-12 school settings, right? We end up getting it in our HBCU institutions. But then you also mentioned the flip side of that is the fact that, yes, as Black people, we are not monolithic,
Mm-hmm.
but part of that means that there is classism that does happen within our community, which does perpetuate the different norms within our dominant culture, which we're going to get into, a little later. So it's interesting to kind of see that, but also to recognize how being exposed to the greatness of our culture and our history propels us to want to do more for our communities. And that was a huge part in your shift from doing business management to getting into education. So if we could just talk to us about that shift specifically, because a lot of us, we didn't grow up wanting to be educators. I know I didn't.
Right.
So somehow we end up doing this work. So how did that shift happen for you specifically?
Yeah, I would say for me, another impactful thing about being at Howard in the time that I was there, and I'm probably dating myself a lot now here, but my freshman year, it was the inaugural march of the Million Man March. So it was like the Million Man March, and that happened like my freshman year. And then after that, 2 weeks later or a week later, we went into and I experienced my first Howard homecoming. The time that I was at Howard, at that time, Bad Boy was really big. And so just to experience and go through the mourning and the death and everything from Biggie and from Tupac, all of that, kind of shaped my Howard experience. But I think that the fact that I had to be in that remedial reading and writing course, I had to teach myself how to read, how to write, like how to study, like truly in depth, how to unpack something. And I realized that in high school, because I had good behavior, it was like, okay, I wasn't a problem child per se. I did my work and I started thinking about the texts that we were reading. And when we read those different texts, and I was able to read, let's just say Iliad and Homer, and that was in high school. Some of the friends I were meeting, they were reading that was a middle school text for them. And I was in scholars classes. And so I began to think about if I was in scholars classes, and I think that there's a gap here, and I know that there's a huge gap here. What about all of my friends who were in the mainstream classes? Right. And so was me unpacking, well, am I really smart? Am I just not smart? Well, I'm not intelligent. Maybe I'm just smart. What is the difference between the two? But being immersed in the library system at Howard University and meeting friends. But, when I graduated, before I graduated, I experienced another devastating loss with the tragic death of my father. And he passed away the summer between my junior year at Howard and my senior year at Howard. And so for me, in that same incident, my mother was also tragically injured, where she had to learn how to walk again and talk again and all of these various things. Wow. And I was home for the summer, it was in between my junior and my senior year. And I was just thinking I was going to transfer to the University of Pittsburgh, that I was just going to be there. I had to be there. I had two younger brothers. And I come from a large family. So my mother's mother and father, they had 12 kids. And it was, when we talk about community again, it was my aunts and uncles who kind of rallied around, was there to support my brothers, there to definitely walk my mom through everything, and told me that I was not going to transfer. to go to a college in Pittsburgh, but to go and continue out my last year at Howard. And I remember going back to campus that year, and I was talking to one of the administrative assistants that I developed a relationship in, that was in a school of business. And I told her, the family tragedy and what I experienced. And I would say that the love and support that she showed, of even opening up additional scholarships, of letting professors know, that I felt that I had a family in a community that was at home supporting my mother, but my Howard family did not let me not succeed. They did not let me just not go on for that particular year. And so I think about the embrace and love from the administration, from the Howard family. And once I graduated, I graduated magna cum laude, different things, had job offers my fall semester before, going into my senior year. So I figured like I was kind of much set. And there was just something about, I went into hospitality because I wanted to travel the world, because I did not want to go back to Pittsburgh. And then after a year or two of living in DC, I actually moved back to Pittsburgh because I thought I had a second chance of life to be with my mother, right? And so I relocated back home, but my job at Marriott wouldn't transfer. So they didn't have any like corporate offices in Pittsburgh. Right. And I remember getting a job, but I started working in an after school program. So this is where I felt like that the pain from losing my cousin and his friend, the pain from losing, my father, I was suppressing all those things, but I really wasn't dealing with them. I thought that, all right, I taught myself how to, study and unpack texts and all this. I graduated magna cum laude, but it wasn't until I went back home, started working in the after school program, that I actually, in the community that I grew up in, and the students were coming in, they were struggling, with their homework. They needed homework support. They needed assistance, all of these different things. And I just remember that pain and embarrassment that I had originally felt on the onset of not passing the SAT or not getting over the 800, that as I was pursuing to get my MBA, now my master's of business administration from the University of Pittsburgh, actually shifted. And that is what led me to get my master's of arts in teaching at Chatham University in Pittsburgh. And so I always tell people that my entry into teaching came from a form of social justice, came from a form of wanting to change the system, to have, in my experience, African-American children to be able to be confident and knowledgeable about their skills, their talents, and their abilities. And so that started the shift into, education. And it was from working in the after school program in my own community with other Black children.
And once again, you mentioned struggle, trauma. And I don't know, this is probably the third or fourth time we've brought it up, and we're 33 minutes in. So I want to hone in on that, because when we talk about grit, the concept of grit, and this is no knock on Angela Duckworth, because I think she is phenomenal. She's a scholar and she does good work in our space. But within the Black context, grit has always been something that's been a part of our DNA. When we think about our historical trauma, we think about just the trauma that we experience being disenfranchised in our K-12 school settings, within our communities. And we celebrate the struggle so much, we embrace it so much, but we don't always look at the detrimental impact of that struggle,
right,
that we so often suppress in our journey. And I'm guilty of this as well. Like, I was somebody who went through grad school paying it off on my own. And that was because my father wasn't really that involved in investing in my college education. So it was a byproduct of that led me to become more self-sufficient, which is a good trait to have. But when you think about the source of that, that's problematic. So I think it was important to just point out.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, even when we talk about, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, the need for us to, we're there, right? So the recognition of it, but for us to do the research, right? So that happens when we talk about grit in these different terms. When someone outside of our culture, outside of our race, or outside of who we are collectively as a people begin to wow, they're powerful, they're amazing. And they begin to do research on us, right? And develop all of these different terms. But when we do the research, a part of our own existence, a part of our community, a part of our upbringing, we are able to continue to humanize, right? Because we humanize ourselves, and we're not talking about ourselves in third, person at all. And so I think that, that is the need to that's why I even look at Hood, right? I mean, there were some people who said like, oh, I'm not sure that you want to say, Dr. Good from the Hood. It has a negative connotation to it. And you may not be able to get consulting contracts or various things, from these particular type of school districts, because they might find it offensive or don't know where you're coming from. And I said, well, that's fine, because then that's not for me to be there in that space, right? So for those who are able, that get it and that work with me and are ready to do this work and unpack it, then those are the people that I'm called to, that's called to me, and let's do this work. And so it's important that we show up and we're doing this work, we're writing and we're putting these things out there, because we're putting our own stories out there and not letting somebody else describe it for us or adding a term for us. No, we're going to tell you.
Right. And the HOOD acronym is your radical form of resistance. That's your way of saying, you know what, I'm going to flip this connotation and transform it into something that's affirming to my people, in the same way that many people, use the N-word. Now, I don't personally use it anymore, because of the history and everything else, but it's the same type of mindset, around that. But I want to go ahead and transition into this idea of culturally responsive teaching versus culturally relevant teaching. And this is very central to the work that you've done through your different initiatives and the work that you're doing at Elms College. So in your words, from your perspective, what's the difference between those two terms? Because so often they're used interchangeably, but many people don't realize that there are some distinctions between the two terms.
Yeah, and I think, part of that comes from the evolution and just growth of the time that we're in, and we become more knowledgeable about things. So we go through, culturally responsive teaching, culturally relevant teaching, and going back to like multicultural education with James Bakes, Sonia Nieto, like what that was the term that we use, like multicultural education and what that meant. Getting into even looking at Dr. Gloria Lessing Billings and her saying and coining the term culturally relevant teaching with the root in history going from critical race theory. Then we have Geneva Gay and going into culturally responsive teaching, right? I think at the essence, right, we're in that same family and saying the same thing. However, when we look at culturally responsive teaching, from my understanding of it, is that we're responding to the needs of, if we're looking at K through 12, right? Who is in our classroom this year? Who are they? So tying in their community, things about them, their family, their culture, their upbringing, all of these different things. And so we're able to shift and make sure that our curriculum, our instruction, everything is aligned up to make sure that they feel validated, right? So Geneva Gay has the 6 tenets, right, of culturally responsive teaching. So the validating, the emancipatory and transformative, and all of these different things that come together because we're responding to the students' needs and including them. And I think that for culturally relevant teaching, yes, there is that awareness of responding to and bringing that into fruition and making sure that we are as educators growing. But not only that, it is like a transformational change that comes along with that. So once you are culturally relevant, right, and coming out from the critical race theory family, now we are saying too, there is the social justice aspect of that we are going to move forward, and we're going to have this transformational change that comes along with that. So we see ourselves, as the ones that's carrying on and doing the work and making sure that we bring in other people along. So it's the knowledge and awareness, but then how is that transforming what we're doing for the larger society of being social activists, of being the activists of really making that critical change. And to me, I think that is the core of the difference between the two.
And I think it's also analogous to the relationship between allyship and being a co-conspirator, right?
Exactly.
Because when we talk about cultural responsiveness, you can have empathy for a person of color if you're a white person and say, you know what, I see you and I recognize the pain and the struggle that your people have gone through your history and even during these recent times. But the relevant piece is where the action lies. And I think many of us stop at the responsiveness stage. And we never get to that stage where we take what we know, that knowledge, and we apply it into our particular context. So I think this is something that we're still dealing with even now, because there's so much conversation around, DEI and diversity and inclusion, and also just trying to find ways to respond to the needs of Black, Indigenous, Latinx, Asian, other people of color, right? So
Yes, definitely. And it makes me think, I believe it was 2018. I think that was the year that then President Barack Obama actually gave the inaugural, the commencement speech at Howard University. And one of the things that he said within that commencement speech is talking about your protesting, right, needs a strategy behind it. And so there's, and your passion needs a strategy behind it. So there's one thing to go to the streets, to protest, to do the rallying cry, to do all of those different things that is necessary, right, to bring attention and awareness of the hurt and pain and the struggle, and that something needs to change. But after all of that, when the passion is going towards that, then what else is happening behind the scene? And so it is not just on the front lines of marching and you looking at your passion, right, exhibiting that out, and we're screaming and we're hurting and we're crying, but what is the strategy behind your passion? So when you get called to, go into the room with different legislators and they say, okay, what is it that you want to change? And so that in the movement, there is all different levels of people that is needed. So the ones on the front that you see, the ones talking, the ones marching, but the one who's actually writing and drafting and coming up with those different strategies. So when, the media coverage is done, the movement of what we were trying to say needed change doesn't stop, because now you're coming right back and hitting on with that strategy. And when you said the ally and the co-conspirator, it made me think about that in regards to, we needed all of these different forms and evolutions of multicultural education, culturally responsive, culturally relevant, even now culturally sustaining, Chris Emden, as we think about the cultural reality pedagogy, like they all have a prominent space in the work that we do, and just learning how to use those and build off of those, and knowing, which one, when we say it's culturally relevant curriculum or culturally responsive, what is it that we actually mean? And looking at that transformational change of a social justice that we are moving forward, and we're not taking or settling for anything less.
And just that whole chain of scholarship.
Yeah.
From Dr. Emden going all the way back to Dr. Ladson Billings. Like, you can't miss that. You definitely can't miss that. It's so evident in the research, so evident in the different philosophies and pedagogies that are
everything.
out
You go
there.
back to the Boyd, you go, Carter G. Woodson, this, I mean, everyone, Asa Hiller, James A. Banks. So there's a whole history that we think about, our ancestors and the evolution of that, and passing on the torch and carrying on the torch. And so for me, it just feels like awesome to be within this. And now that you have an opportunity to stand up, to have your voice, heard, how are you going to use this moment? How are you going to carry forth their legacy and build another legacy for generations to come? Not just, for the inspiration or for the motivation, but actual true change of doing this work, of knowing that while I'm working with in-service teachers in a teacher preparation program, like, why are we going to be talking about this 20 years later, right? Or is there going to be an impact and change that is different when I'm doing professional development workshops with school districts? What are those, there's the seeds that have been planted all the way, but now let's see that full tree, and let's see the bloom and the leaves from that. We're making, this impactful change, that we're no longer just talking about the woes or whatever, urban, the coded language urban is termed for, to really thinking about, the joy and the genius within. And I think for me, it's actually challenging myself, because a lot of times you can talk about the struggle and what is so hard and disrupting and dismantling and all of these various things. But in essence, if we flip it and say it the other way, we're creating these radical spaces of hopefulness. And I choose for even myself, I would say sustainability and mental health and everything, that I don't want to keep operating through the anger, through the hurt, through the pain, but flipping it to look at through the joy, right? Mm-hmm. So we go back to Hood again. It is operating through the joy of how I choose to define or determine of how I'm going to move forward.
Right. And this is a perfect segue into the work that you're doing right now at Elms College through the Center of Equity in Urban Education, where you are the founding executive director. So this is a brand new center within the institution. And as someone who was born in Massachusetts, in Springfield, not too far from the college, and knows a little bit about Elms College, I know that it is a PWI, predominantly white institution.
Yeah.
And you are coming in with your Dr. Good from the hood. Let's talk about social justice. Let's talk about anti-racism, which might be new in that institution. So I want to know from you what the overarching mission of the center is, and what kind of initiatives, and where do you see the center maybe within the next year or two? Because I know you're still new in the role, but what are you aspiring to do within this new role?
Right. I would say that for the Center for Equity in Urban Education was created to be another path or an avenue to diversify the teaching pipeline. If we break down diversity, basically it is like diverse from whiteness, right? So to get more educators into the teaching pipeline that are actually certified as classroom teachers. So tapping into the paraprofessionals, tapping into the other people who may be within the school but are not the certified lead classroom teachers. And predominantly those tend to be the BIPOC educators that are in the building. So if we look at the area where I'm at now in Massachusetts, a high population of Latinx individuals, African Americans, Haitians. So if we say diversify the teaching pipeline, technically it is to get people of color into lead teaching roles. And for me, it is building off of my life and work I have been doing for the, I would say, past 15 years, but even most immediately to this position of being a part of overseeing and running the Pittsburgh Urban Teaching Corps, which had the same mission of career changers coming into education, preparing them to work in an urban school district, urban environment, and what that meant to really get Black and brown educators into the classroom. And so it's building for me of running those 5 cohorts in Pittsburgh and now seeing that within the center. And so not only just to diversify the teaching pipeline in the undergraduate degrees and in the master level degrees, but also the holistic approach from top to bottom. And so as we think about if the students are coming into the program, but then they're placed in a school district with a principal leader, a school leader, with a mentor teacher that have not done the work themselves to unpack and to really look at culturally responsive teaching. What does that mean to not just say, oh, there's a checkbox that we have a Black or brown educator inside of our classroom, but what work have you already done to shift and change the culture and climate within your school building to welcome us there? Do you fully see us? Do you fully embrace us? And so one thing is, you know, working with the students to get them through and passing their site, their state licensure test to become, you know, this licensed classroom teacher, but hand in hand at that same time, working with the school leaders of changing the school culture and climate. So they're going through training and professional development and all of those different things to make sure that they are culturally responsive educators. And the mentor teachers that my students will be placed with, have you done the work for yourselves that need to be done? And also looking at the university professors too as well.
Talk about it.
That is a huge thing. So I just feel like in higher ed, as much as we focus on working with K through 12 teachers to make sure that they are more culturally responsive in their practice and their pedagogy, that it kind of stops when we get to higher ed. And those same professors who have been teaching at institutions of higher ed for years in the education department, who, you know, may have been great teachers when they were teaching in the classroom, but it's still a disconnect, or they're hired and their whole experience has been in a suburban school district. So if we're going to have a program that we're diversifying the teaching pipeline to prepare future teachers to work in the urban school districts and environments, how are we truly doing that at higher ed if we're not even doing that same training, or they're being taught by professors who haven't even unpacked where they are yet? Like, can they say Black Lives Matter and truly mean it? Or are they coming back and saying, no, it's all lives matter, right? Do they understand and empathize, and are they doing the work of being a co-conspirator themselves? What does their curriculum look like in the college classroom? And so it is really calling out to call higher all of these different aspects within preparing an educator to work in an urban school district.
All right. You brought up the professors. You brought up the professors.
Oh, I have to.
Many of whom are probably tenured or on pace to be tenured and set for life. So let's talk about that for a second, because from our conversations off air, you did mention the fact that the Center of Equity in Urban Education is independent of Elms College, correct?
Well, it is independent, I would say, of the School of Education. So our president of the university wanted to have this center built And the center, usually when you have like the Center for Equity, Center for Urban Education, they are within the School of Education. So my particular center is not in the School of Education. So it is a standalone, but collaborates, and my faculty line is in the School of Education as an associate professor. However, of looking at what does it mean and what does it take to really develop a teacher. Now that's going into the teaching workforce in 2021. What does that mean, right? It is actually looking at and partnering with psychology and social work and doing a reintegration of all of those courses coming together. And so I think that that builds and make it stronger too, as well, that we're not just inside of the School of Education, but a standalone. And so I'm able to really partner with across interdisciplinary lines to make sure that we are building and developing a new and holistic approach to education and teacher preparation.
Right. So it's independent of the College of Education. So here's my question. So it's possible that within Elms College, you could have two types of teacher candidates come out. One that is within the Center of Equity and Urban Education under your tutelage, but then you have those who still go through the traditional College of Ed route and still get a teacher education. So I guess I'm wondering, how do we get Elms College or just institutions who have these programs that are rooted in social justice, rooted in anti-racist education, how do we get them to merge the programs together to have one unified goal, one unified mindset? So I know it's a big question.
No, actually that was part of my, my question. Like, I understand the interdisciplinary approach and having it separate to really kind of just move it forward faster and what this means until we are able to work with the existing structure that is there, right? Because there's layers of breaking through someone who was already tenured and then asking them or telling them or demanding them that now they become more culturally responsive. Now they talk about anti-racism and these different terms that they don't even know about, haven't even experienced. They're just into teaching their content in absence of the greater society. And so for me, my goal is, and what the charge is from the university president, is that, yes, this is interdisciplinary approach from the center. But as I am doing this work, I'm also looking at all of the curriculum, all of the syllabi from all of the teachers or professors within the whole entire School of Education. How do we make those more culturally responsive? How do we roll out the training for professors that make it mandatory in regards to their professional development and growth that is needed to be done? And so I agree with you 100%. It is, okay, so you'll have, students that are going through and becoming educators that are more culturally responsive, but then you still have this gap over here that is just like, oh, but it's okay if they go into the teaching workforce and still continue to do the damage that we know has been happening.
Right.
And I think for me, it's also dissecting what urban means, right? Or the decoded language, urban or suburban. So are we saying urban and meaning whatever is a deficit, whatever is poor, whatever, whatever the problem kids or the problem parents? But if we say suburban, are we talking about white people that's very affluent, that have all of these different things and there's no challenges and all of these other things? And so, and then rural too, as well, and the challenges that exist there. And so for me, because it is a program to diversify the teaching pipeline, and you're going to get educators of color coming into the program to get them certified so they can work in the urban school district, and the tenets of culturally responsive teaching ingrained throughout the curriculum. Does that mean or not mean that if you have a white student who's coming through the program and they go work in a white suburban school district that they don't need to be taught and trained and developed to be a culturally responsive educator, that them
Right.
and their choice of where they want to teach at, that if they see or hear a comment, look at curriculum, and there's no people of color in that book, in that curriculum, there's no images, there's no whatever, that's okay. Like, no. And so, always to now problematize the word or the phrase urban education. Like, what are we saying? The type of education and what is needed in a shift is for all students, all cultures, all backgrounds, all school districts, regardless of if it's urban, suburban, rural, regardless of if you're a BIPOC educator or a white educator, that it should not be okay for them to be a white educator, to go into a white suburban school district and not bring that voice and not challenge, right? And to continue to say, let's just say, Christopher Columbus founded America and we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving. No, they need to be able to problematize that and bring up the reason why. They need to be able to have different books about, BIPOC people and authors and characters and things like that. And so you brought up one of the conflicts that I'm actually experiencing in simultaneously as I'm building up the center, working on that too as well. It should not be separate.
And if this makes you feel any better, and I'm sure it will, they're an offspring of programs, teacher residencies, teacher education programs that are being given birth during this era that are all about what you're doing. So I know at UMass Amherst, you have Dr. Jamil Lee Scott and Dr. Keisha Green. They just launched the Center of Racial Justice and Youth Engaged Research. So there's a local example right there.
Yes.
Even in Boston, there's the Donovan Urban Teaching Scholars Program, which has been there for years. And Dr. Catherine Wong, who recently just left that position after 15 years, was running it. But there are programs out there that are doing similar work, and they're dealing with those same dynamics within their institutions of academia.
Mm-hmm.
So part of the work that has to happen is to dismantle these ideologies and to really focus on decolonizing versus diversifying. Because diversifying is great, but diversifying can easily become tokenism. Mm-hmm. It can easily be performative if you just focus on that solely, right? And it goes back to what we said about Black people, and you can even say Indigenous people, you can even say Latinx people, Asian people, whatever race you put in that blank. We're not monolithic. We all have varied experiences that lead us to have different mindsets and a different process of conditioning as it relates to how we were brought up in society. So I think it's important for us to always keep that in mind.
Exactly. As I think about my own son right now, and then the school district that he's in, since we moved up to Massachusetts, is considered a white suburban school district. And so the challenges that he is facing, as a Black male, going to a school that's predominantly white students, all white teachers, of not seen and feeling heard or valued, or not even seeing, there's no textbooks, that represents him. There's no images and all of those different things. And so, like you said, we're not monolithic. All, BIPOC people, if you want to say Asian Americans, African Americans, Latinx, we're not in the considered just only public urban schools, right? That we are everywhere with different experiences and different backgrounds and different upbringings. And we all want to be seen and heard and valued, within our schooling system and throughout the curriculum and text. And so I always, ask educators too, again, like, what is the purpose of education? Like, and once you graduate from high school and go on about your life, but as we think about different corporations and the need for them to have chief diversity officers, right? If we were able to really do this flip of K through 12 education, what we continue to need to have these chief diversity officers. So if you look at some of the CEOs or top leaders who may be in charge at corporations, did they come through a monolithic suburban white school district that did not unpack, did not unchallenge, and talking about systemic racism? So they're just unaware of it. Now they're unaware of it, going into whatever leadership position they're in whatever particular field of study that they chose. Hence the need to have so much of this cultural diversity, awareness, diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever you want to call it, all of these different trainings at corporations too as well. And so I think that, once education system gets it right, the K through 12 and the higher ed of thinking about what it is and what is our view of education holistically, and preparing, like there's in the mission statements, preparing to be global citizens to change the world. Like we see that everywhere. But what does that mean? Because you're not actually teaching them like that. You're not preparing them like that right now.
It's all cosmetic. At the end of the day, it's all performative language that's romanticized and is just there to bring people in. And that's another conversation for another day, especially the rise of DEI coordinators and directors in different school districts just over the past year or so. That should actually be a future episode in itself. I should just bring some DEI directors on just to talk about the experience and to just really get the real about that, because I've heard some rumblings about it from folks.
They become the equity person in their school district or in the corporation, where it's just like, oh, without one person and we can just go to them. It's like, no, you got to do your own work. You got to be involved in this too as well, and don't just point to, oh, that's the equity person, so we'll ask them. No, do your own research too as well. Right. It's the holistic approach that is all of us. And I think sometimes when there's that one equity person versus the equity team, or not going to the core of the standards or the mission of the true mission of living it out within a K through 12 organization or a corporation, that it becomes to, like you said, the performative of, oh, well, we hired our director of diversity and inclusion person, check. Like, no, we have to unpack that and go deeper to decolonize, like you said.
Oh, we have to. And we could talk about that all day. So I want to go ahead and transition to our lightning round. We've been talking real heavy about education, which we love very much, but we want to keep things light right now. So I sent you some questions. I'm not sure if you had a chance to think about your responses. If not, that's cool as well. It's always great to have those organic responses come out, in the moment. So first question for the lightning round is your favorite self-care activity right now. What's your favorite self-care activity?
My favorite self-care activity right now is, actually did it earlier today, is once I go to the gym and work out on the treadmill. They have the massage room, so making sure that I lay down on the massage bed and get the hydro massage.
Awesome. Your biggest pet peeve?
Someone asking me to pick my brain. Like, oh, you have a minute, can I pick your brain? Like, no, you cannot pick my brain. You're going to pay for my student loans and all these years of experience and sacrifice that I had to go through. No, so picking my brain.
One book that every educator should read?
Oh, wow. I'm reading so many right now. And I would say one of the ones, just the most recent, well, not even the most recent, but the one I've been using for the last couple of years, I would say definitely Dr. Chris Emdin for the white folks who teach in the hood, and the rest of y'all too.
Love that book. One of my favorites. All right. Now that you're in Massachusetts, and this is probably a cliche question, but I have to ask, do you still call soda pop?
Yes, it is pop. And then I think about other words from Pittsburgh, like rubber band and gum band. So I am a pop girl, born and raised in Pittsburgh. So it is still pop. It is still in me.
You're not code switching for the Massachusetts folks, are you? Nah.
No, I'm not. I'm not even code switching when it comes to the football NFL teams. I'm still a true Steelers fan, in and out. Not switching to the Patriots.
All right. Last question. If you can invite 3 influential, I was gonna say figures, but let's say women because it's still Women's History Month. Dead or alive, who would they be? 3 influential women.
Wow, right off the bat, I definitely think of Mary McLeod Bethune. And her history and legacy and just education and being a Black woman in education and what that means to me. Even at Howard, I stayed in Bethune-Cookman Hall, the dorm. And I will also say Michelle Obama. I just love her and admire her. And so definitely Michelle Obama. And who else? Bell Hooks. I just love her and just love her writing and just, I still have the opportunity for Bell Hooks and Michelle Obama to have the opportunity to meet them and to engage with them.
All right. You may have to send a tweet her way.
Yes.
She responds, see what happens. Wow. But Tyra, man, thank you so much for being a part of the podcast. This has been another great conversation. And we stay true to what we said off air. Because usually we go hours and hours talking.
3-hour marathon.
We kept it to just over an hour, which is a huge accomplishment for us because we can go in for hours until we're just totally bloodshot eye red. So I appreciate you for engaging with me and let people know how they can connect with you and also learn more about the Center of Equity and Urban Education at Elms College. So let them know your information.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. It was a pleasure. I would say that on social media, whether it is Instagram or Twitter, my handle is Tyra the Good Doctor. So Tyra the Good, and then doctor at the end is DR. So Tyra the Good Doctor. And on Facebook, I have a Dr. Tyra Good like page. And so to find out more about the Center for Equity in Urban Education, as I've been there for a short 8 months now, but all of the different things that I have for the vision of moving forward and our inaugural speaking that will happen this fall, it will be at Elms, ELMS.edu. So elms.edu. You can find out more information there.
Awesome. So make sure you all connect with Tyra. She is a wealth of knowledge and she's just doing fantastic work, not just in Massachusetts, but also back in her hometown of Pittsburgh, PA, where she's still connected very much so with a lot of the students and educators out there. So thank you again. And we're going to connect real soon because we have some things that are coming in the works, with the two of us. So
yes.
All right. So we'll see you soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right, folks. So there we have it. Another episode of Identity Talk Educators Live in the books. So as I always tell you all, I wish you all a good morning, good night, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, everybody.